In this episode, we get a very good question from one of our good friends and graduates, Nick Pearden, around a statement that I often use around life being about consciously creating ourselves. I talk about why I believe that, how I've seen that in action in my life, and ultimately leave you with the question, do you believe life is about consciously creating ourselves? Tune in.
28 and I'm trying to shape history, pulling from the sky for some strength to take with me, line up the stars, fly away quickly and push the world forward like a tidal wave hit me. I ride the wave swiftly, I fear no man, check my titles mate quickly, came from the sky with the light of day in.
Welcome to this episode of AskJackD. We are engaged in a very thorough conversation between Shawnee, Rosie, myself and Instagram Live. The thing that goes on with Rosie that I don't think you guys fully appreciate is that when the cameras aren't rolling, Rosie is a great talker. She talks and talks and talks and talks. We love her for that. The minute the camera turns on and we go like, Rosie, let's have a chat before we get into that question for this particular episode, she doesn't have much to say.
I know, it's because I get nervous on the camera, and I bet a lot of people watching would have the same problem.
Can probably relate to you.
But they probably haven't done like over 200 episodes of a show. So
That's true. We're just after a little bit more, aren't we, Shawnee? Absolutely.
But you do always ask me the same question.
I do. It's always, Rosie, how you doing? So I won't ask you that today.
Okay, cool.
What shall I ask you?
I don't know.
Now I'm the one that's got Alrighty, that's the band for today. Rosie, what question are we going with?
Okay, we are going to take Nick Pearden's question today. He says, hey mate, I've heard you say before that you believe the purpose of life is to consciously create who you want to become. Can you talk to us a little bit about this? P.S. Currently tuning in from and traveling in Hawaii, largely because the SNS program allowed me to do so with my business. Can't thank you enough.
Nick Pearden, you are an absolute legend. So Nick is a graduate of our Scalable and Saleable program, and he's currently in Hawaii, no doubt doing a whole bunch of creative exercises. So I talk about how life is a process of consciously creating ourselves. What do I mean by that? Well, Nick, you're a great example of that, right? You're somebody that's chosen who they want to be, who they don't want to be. You do the foundational work required in order to get really clear on what you want to create, and then you go about creating it, right? So when I say life is about consciously creating who we are, what I mean by that is this. I think that as human beings, we grossly underestimate our creative abilities and our creative powers. And when I say creative, I don't mean creative as in artistic, I mean creative as in our ability to create, right? In my view of humans and in my view of the world, we are consciously, every second of every minute of every hour of every day, creating who we are becoming, and creating the world around us. We do that with our thoughts, our words, and our deeds, right? Three creative forces: our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. And so how we think, how we speak, what we speak of, how we show up, who we decide to show up as, are all creative inputs into creating who we are, the life that we lead, and therefore the world around us on any given day, right? And that's why I'm such an advocate of buying yourself time and space. And Nick, you being in Hawaii is a really good example of this. Buying ourselves time and space to consciously create, right? My view is that everybody is creating who they are in their life every single fucking minute of the day, whether you're conscious of it or not, right? I'm not conscious of how when I press this button, the phone comes on. I'm not conscious of that, but it happens, whether I know how it happens or not, right? So my view is that most people, like the vast majority of people, live in what I call a hypnosis of disempowerment. They don't realize that they're creating who they are. And so I think that when you understand that you're creating you, when you understand that you're creating everything around you, and you consciously take the time to do that, and you consciously create the time to think about that, and therefore you become more conscious of your thoughts, you become more conscious of what you say, you become more conscious of what you do, then you start to consciously create who you are. And in my view, that's kind of why we're here, right? Is to consciously create and experience who we are. the other side of that is that I think, so that's kind of like I'm not sure anybody could argue with that in a practical sense, right? I do think about it as well, if you want to take it one step further, in a somewhat spiritual sense, right? And that is to say that I've had so many experiences throughout my life where I've thought about something that I want to create and then I create it to the T, right? Like one thing an advisor said to me the other day is, Jack, be careful for what you want because you probably won't achieve it. You'll probably achieve exactly what you want. And that's true for everybody. That's not just true for me. Often we create exactly what we want. But an example of this sort of stuff is like the Think and Grow Rich story that you guys would have heard me talk about, right, Shawnee? So to talk to that, and this is the sort of component that highlights. Are we doing okay? Your face doesn't look too good.
Really? Oh my gosh, no. Okay, I'm just concentrating. We are doing well.
So the Think and Grow Rich story is this: when I was going through high school, I wasn't very engaged and I wasn't the best student. In year 12, I pulled my finger out and I actually started to apply myself. And so at the end of year 12, I won an award, which is the biggest backhanded compliment anybody can get in life, let alone high school. But the award that I won was most improved. And the reward for winning, an award was that you got to do what every teenage student wants to do, which is go down to the local bookstore and pick a book, right? Which is totally not your idea of excitement when you're a 17-year-old male. Anyway, so I went down to the bookstore and the book I ended up choosing was a book called Think and Grow Rich. And then you sort of get given that book on speech night in front of your parents and your friends' parents and your friends and your peers and your teachers and everyone's there and you get this book. What was interesting for me is that I was then invited back to my school a couple of years ago. So I hadn't been back to my school once in about 10 years. I was then invited back to my school and went back to my school at my at the headmaster of the school's request, spoke to all the students, spoke to some of the teachers, spoke to the new headmaster, the old headmaster who was headmaster for me when I was going through as a student, came back, as did some of my other teachers, so they all come back. And it was a truly profound experience. What happened in that particular example is I woke up the next morning with this strange kind of feeling going, this strange kind of memory of the day before when I was doing a tour of my school. And when they were giving me a tour of the school, one of the things they said is, Jack, forgive us, we're really messy in here today, we're setting up for speech night. And when they were giving me a tour of the school, 10 years after I'd left, that statement just kind of went in one ear out the other ear. When I woke up the next day, I had that comment it's like the flashback at like the end of the movie when like a character gets a flashback and then it all makes sense. So I got a flashback to that sentence going, we're setting up for speech night tonight. And so I looked at my phone and confirmed what date it was the day before when I went back to my school to talk to them about, how to create a life that you love and how to create a career that aligns with who you are and meet with all the current headmaster and the previous headmaster and all of that sort of stuff. And I checked when speech night was 10 years earlier when they gave me the book Think and Grow Rich, right? The day that I got invited back to my school was 10 years later to the day after that speech night was 10 years prior, right? So speech night arrived, got a book called Think and Grow Rich. The entire auditorium literally laughed me off stage for selecting that book. And then 10 years later to the day, they invited me back to speak to the students and the teachers, and all the teachers came back, and I had a news crew there who came with me that particular day. And the reason they invited me back is because I've just been listed, I think for the first time, on the BRW Young Rich List, right? And so here you've got a 17-year-old boy who's choosing a book called Think and Grow Rich, getting laughed off stage because of it, and then literally coming back to my school because I've just been listed on the BRW Young Rich List 10 years later to the day, right, after choosing a book called Think and Grow Rich, because I've always had the belief that with our thoughts, we create ourselves, and with ourselves, our words and our deeds, we create our worlds, right? And so when something like that happens, where it's like literally 10 years to the day, like the chances of that happening, I worked it out at one point. It's not very likely that happens, right? I can't remember the mathematics. But it's incredibly unlikely. And so when something like that happens, I take it as a sign. I encourage you guys to take anything that's sort of serendipitous, right? I believe providence moves too. When you're really clear on who you want to be, when you're really clear on the life you want to create, providence moves and you enable yourself to create things that you otherwise wouldn't if you weren't consciously creating who you want to be and who you are, right? And so for me, that's why I think we're here, is to consciously create who we want to be, consciously create the life we want to live, and consciously create the world around us. That's a really fucking good question, Nick, and I love that. And I love that you're asking that from Hawaii, because I spent the last Christmas, so not this Christmas that's just been, but the Christmas prior to that, spending like 10 days in Hawaii, journaling, meditating, resting, creating, right? That's why I say sometimes our downtime is our most creative and productive time, because that's the time where we consciously start to create whatever it is that we want to build thereafter. Guys, what I'm interested to hear from you guys is everything I just said, because I'm genuinely interested in this. I want to know, do you share that same view? Some of you will go, no, Jack, I don't believe that. I'm a victim of everything that happens to me, and my mum said this, my dad did that, my brother told me this, and I've been fucked up ever since. Some of you will say, sure, Jack, that's all right for you, but it doesn't apply to me because. And some of you will go, yes, I categorically agree with that, Jack, and I apply those principles in my life, or any of the versions in between. But I'm interested to get your view. Do you think we consciously create who we are and the world around us every second of every minute of every day? In the comments below, Nick Pearden, thank you for that question. See you guys soon.